Hello, and welcome to the Tidal Cyber Fireside Chat. We got this covered on attack coverage introspection. Today, we have with us Timothy Keeler from Remediant to discuss their lessons learned from using attack, communicating about and mapping to attack, and really anything else about attack coverage that they think might help the community. So with that, Tim, why don't you start by introducing yourself and explaining what type of capabilities Remediant provides?
Yeah, well, great, and thank you for having me, Frank. So a little bit of my background, I actually come from the practitioner side of the world. So that was really the inspiration for me starting Remediant. And, it was really about solving this problem of lateral movement through the use of stolen admin credentials. This is a problem that we see in almost every attack, whether it's coming from a nation state actor or, can you run of the mill ransomware attack? And, and that was really the inspiration for starting Remediant. And what we found is a lot of companies, whether they're really large, complex enterprises, or even small companies, have a hard time managing admin controls. And really the premise of our company is nobody should have admin rights 24/7. We call that standing privilege. It should be completely dynamic and issued on a just-in-time basis, and it should be very specific and granular for the individual. So when you think about Remediant, that's really the problem that we're solving, and super excited to be here.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting capability, especially considering, right, every adversary needs to use credentials at the end of the day to be able to move throughout the environment and gain access to certain parts of the system. So it's an incredibly important aspect of security defense to be able to restrict those accesses. So to that point, MITRE ATT&CK has a lot about credential access and utilization of credentials and privileges within its knowledge base. So this might be in some ways self-explanatory, but what really drove you guys to start using MITRE ATT&CK, and when did that epiphany that you should leverage it really come along?
Yeah, so it's really a huge plethora of information, right? I mean, these are what's all the attacks that we're seeing in the real world, right? This is kind of the database, the standard of, hey, these are specifically how attackers are exploiting networks. It's not an academic exercise. This is not talking about, maybe vulnerability that sits out there with a low threshold that no one ever exploits, right? These are the real meaningful things for our customers. It's also very meaningful for us as a company because we're the ones that are developing cybersecurity defense technology, and we embrace this framework very much so as anyone else should. And it's really critical. So we want to make sure our product is extremely secure. We're not introducing, threats, whether it's an attacker trying to hit us through, supply chain type of attack, or hitting our product, or how our customers are building defense technologies out there.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you've seen the importance of embracing it, and that you're using it to kind of motivate what you do to a certain degree. But like how do you guys actually use it today in your typical processes, whether it's within the tool or in communication? Like how do you most leverage it these days?
Yeah, so when we take a look at our product, right, we see how this fits into the attack matrix, right? So there's kind of a few areas that we particularly focus in. Privilege escalation, persistence, and lateral movement are really kind of at the core of the product. And so when we're having conversations with customers that are really embracing the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we are having a very intelligent, educated discussion. We're able to map exactly what we are doing to these specific controls so the customer understands, the value that they're getting out of their product. And, I think one of the challenges that we hear with, the attack framework is there is just so much, right? And it's really, really hard. It's like, okay, like, there are a lot of products that make a lot of claims out there. Like, what claims are actually valid? Which ones are kind of, fluffy marketing stuff? And, and that's a bit of frustration that we hear out in the industry. And that's when why we're really excited to be partnering with you, Frank.
Yeah, and so how does that work, right? You bring up a very valid statement when you talk about attack coverage, and part of the reason why we do this is because there's both the goods and the bads of it, right? There's a lot of misuse or misunderstanding of it, even if it's not misused. And so you guys have a very focused capability. So how does that communication work with your customers when they want you to explain your attack coverage?
Yeah, I'm, coming from the practitioner side of the world, I was always irritated when a cybersecurity vendor would come in and just say, "Hey, we have the magic bullet that's going to solve all of your cybersecurity problems. You're never going to be breached again." And I was like, "Oh, come on! Like, there's so many different methods out there, and that's certainly not the case today." We really embrace that with our product. So, when we come in and we're talking about our product as it relates to the to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, lateral movement is kind of the core of it, but we're not just saying like lateral movement in general. We're keeping this very specific to lateral movement through the use of compromised admin credentials, right? And our view is there's a difference between the authentication and the authorization. Now you can have, obviously you want very strong, complex passwords that are rotated on the appropriate basis. But at the end of the day, if an attacker is able to compromise the system, pull those credentials out of memory, it doesn't matter how strong those credentials were to begin with. And, there's a big treasure trove of credentials already out there. And so we focus on the authorization, the authorization controls. And so what that becomes is kind of a really important aspect of lateral movement, because a lot of IT admins have 24/7 admin rights on everything in the infrastructure, or it's really easy for an adversary to use those credentials, log on a system, and start harvesting more and more credentials. And so what we do is when we talk about this, as part of the attack matrix, right, we're looking at, the lateral movement, where spear phishing plays a role in this, where credential theft, where persistence is, how to detect the difference between an admin just doing their regular day-to-day activity versus an adversary using those credentials for malicious access. And those things can be really, really hard to detect, but those are the areas that we specifically focus on. So we talk about the credential access, the discovery to understand who has admin rights and where that sprawl is and what that risk profile looks like in the environment, and then how an attacker is going to exploit that through lateral movement, and and then more importantly, kind of have that persistence out there. So even if malware is cleaned up, they still have a backdoor into the systems. So when we're talking to customers, right, we're going into the specific controls that are available and talking through both the real world implications, what we are seeing with other companies, what the breakdown of all the breach reports are saying. And and honestly, it's a lot of work for us, and it's a lot of work for a customer that is trying to manage this, right? And we're just talking about like one very specific problem in cybersecurity, but it's a very important one, and ones that people have, they have a lot of worry about. They're like, hey, we know we have some problems under our hand, but we don't have a way to quantify this, and we don't have a way to even start solving this. And that's really where we try to focus our value proposition to customers.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think one of the important aspects to point out, and what you just talked about there, is in this, there's been a recent uptick in concepts around attack flows, right? So how one attack technique trickles into another one, which trickles into another one, which trickles into another one, right? And so as an attacker tries to achieve their objectives, right, they've got to go through a number of these steps. And when you think about most of the activity that's happening out there, take ransomware as a prime example, right? It's not just about what you can do on that first box and what you can protect there. And it sounds like you guys are definitely leveraging aspects to that. It's about spreading, right? It's about getting around the network, which is why that lateral movement piece is so important when you consider really any type of intrusion these days that's occurring. So I think that it's a really important piece to set, as you put it. It's a focused problem, but it's a very important problem, and the type of solutions you're providing. So I really like those insights. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and you're working with us in an initiative, and that Tidal Cyber, for those that aren't tracking at home yet, we are working with vendors like Remediant to get their attack mappings and put them into a publicly accessible repository, which will hopefully bring transparency to end users, so that they can know what they can do to address the threats that they care about. And so one of the things that I'd be interested in doing is what really resonated with you about this effort that made it so that you wanted to participate at this early of a stage.
Yeah, so the key word that you said was transparency. That's something that's extremely valuable to us as a company, also to me personally as an individual. And this is not just another marketing platform for vendors just to, kind of throw their stuff up. But, even in our conversations, right, we've had, very, very direct conversations. It's like, hey, we really have to show exactly how we are mapping to these different controls and not just kind of doing this big blast line like, oh yeah, we're going to solve all these, these controls. And, it's about us, being honest with ourselves. But, more importantly, is having that level of accountability across the board, because what we hear from customers and all of my peers on on the practitioner side, like they are really struggling to identify, oh, what are all these tools really doing? Where do I have overlap of coverage? Where do I have gaps in coverage? And how do I even know and become aware of, different tools to solve these different problems, right? And, as a early stage startup, that was something that we struggled with, is like, hey, we don't have a huge megaphone, and there's a lot of companies just aren't aware of what we're solving and how we're solving this very differently than other companies. And this is a great way to bring visibility to us, but also at the end of the day, it's something that customers, they going back to that transparency statement, right? They don't really understand, oh, these are the controls that you're mapping to, and I can understand why.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely great, and I appreciate the support and the shared vision in that, right? And at the end of the day, I think that's one of the interesting things about attack and defense is that there are so many different ways of tackling the problem. So being able to shine a light on the various ways, I think, is important. And part of the way that Tidal's trying to achieve that is by not just providing a simple mapping of you have a thing that maps to attack, but it's instead talking about what that thing is, right? So being able to provide better descriptions around it, better types of configuration details around it. And so just wondering about like the more granular details about your mapping that might exist in there. What are some key aspects when a user comes into our platform that you'd like to make sure that they can recognize? What is it about the mappings and how you guys represent and how you do the mappings that you really want to make sure you get across?
Yeah, I think the ability to kind of filter and drill down in the specific areas that the company is trying to manage, right? Because everyone has their risk profile, and their list of items to tackle within the organization is infinitely long, right? And then the role of the CISO is coming in. They're helping kind of prioritize, understand where that matters to the company and how that fits into their risk posture. And so when somebody's going to your platform, it's really about, hey, I need to understand these things. These are the ones that are really on the top of my list. Let me be able to go in, specifically filter whether it's by the different different verticals or different areas, or even if there's like a specific control that you're looking for, right? You can basically go in, filter that information, and then understand like, oh, these are the different technologies that are available to me. And then I can really understand and read the context behind that. And, I think that's extremely valuable, because that's been one of the big challenges out there. It's, hey, you have your list of, security controls you need to cover. There's lots of different frameworks. It's just overwhelming. The amount of information there is just absolutely overwhelming. So being able to filter that down is, I think, a huge value.
No, and definitely appreciate that. And it is one of those things that we want to provide more mechanisms for our users to continually be able to adjust and configure, right? So if you want to care about specific threat groups, right, add that to the matrix and then compare that against the solutions you have and be able to articulate what you have or what you could get. And so I think that marries up a lot with the vision that we want to have. And I think that you guys have done a great job in showcasing the how to address a product that has relations around different techniques, right? Those to what we were talking about before, the flows, being able to understand, okay, you guys are removing specific permissions. Techniques require specific permissions. Mm-hmm. So being able to reflect that in our platform to say, okay, this is something that they mitigate because they've already addressed those permission issues if you have deployed their solution and used their solution. in the way that they describe. And so definitely appreciate all the support that you guys have done and being able to be part of this platform, and looking forward to considering or to seeing how you continue to leverage it, and the traction that it has. And so with that, Tim, is there anything else that you would like to kind of bring up in ATT&CK or about your product in general before we close this out?
It's just been great having this conversation with you, Frank. So thank you very much for having me. Really like everything that Tidal is doing and the platform. I think this is going to go, a lot of places here. And so we're very excited just to be having this conversation early on.
And I again, thank you so much for that. Thank you for participating in the registry, being part of this community edition that is really trying to propel industry forward, right, with a publicly accessible knowledge base of what defenders can do. So thank you for taking that leap, submitting your capabilities to us, and being part of this chat to talk about the goods and the bads of ATT&CK as somebody that's been using it through the years. So thank you. And thank you for all those that have listened to us already in this fireside chat today. If you haven't already, go over to tidalcyber.com. You can find more about threat-informed defense and what we actually mean about what problems Tidal is trying to solve, as well as get access to that community platform so that you can see Remediant's data and other vendors' data within it. So feel free to check that out. But thank you all. Thank you, Tim and Remediant, for your support, and talk to you next time.